I never believed in moments that split your life into before and after until that Thursday morning. It started as just another weekday, routine, predictable, nothing out of place. I remember standing at the kitchen counter in my pale blue robe, sipping coffee while my husband Daniel checked emails on his phone. We were talking about the weekend barbecue at his parents' house. His father, Kenneth, always insisted on grilling steaks himself. He liked to joke that he was the king of the patio, even if his burgers were dry half the time. I was folding the grocery list and thinking I'd need to pick up his dry cleaning too, since he had an important presentation the next day. Daniel was distracted, as usual, tapping out a reply to his boss. If someone had told me that by sunset I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about his family, I would have laughed it off. But life has a way of dropping a match onto the kindling you didn't even realize you'd stacked. Around 10 a.m., I drove downtown to Magnolia Cleaners. It's tucked into the corner of an old brick building next to a florist and across the street from the Magnolia Hotel. I'd been there 100 times. So often the cashier knew me by name. I was humming some mindless tune when I stepped out onto the sidewalk, bag in hand. I glanced across the street just out of habit. That's when I saw them. At first, I didn't process what I was looking at. There was Kenneth, my father-in-law, standing just outside the hotel entrance. He was dressed in the charcoal suit I'd seen him wear at last month's gala, and he was leaning in close to a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger, 30-something maybe, tall and stylish in a cream blouse and slim black trousers. I could see the way she was smiling up at him, the way he tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. My first thought was that I was mistaken. It couldn't be Kenneth. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him from this angle. My heart thumped so hard I felt a little lightheaded. I stepped behind a pillar, suddenly afraid he'd see me staring. I peeked out again. No mistake, it was definitely him. I'd seen that gold watch, the one he wore every day since his retirement party. My stomach flipped. My palms went clammy. I watched as he touched the small of her back, too familiar, too intimate, and guided her inside. The doorman nodded and smiled as if he knew them. I stood frozen, holding the dry cleaning bag like it weighed 100 pounds. My mind was skidding in all directions, searching for any reasonable explanation. Maybe she was a work colleague? But the way they looked at each other, it wasn't professional. Maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding, but even as I tried to convince myself, I knew better. They didn't come out. The minutes dragged on. I checked my phone, even though I didn't know what I was waiting for. Proof? Permission to pretend I hadn't seen it? In the pit of my stomach, I felt something sour blooming, an unease I couldn't shake. I thought about calling Daniel right then, but what would I say? "Hi, I'm downtown, and I think your father is having an affair." The words felt impossible to form. I imagined the look on his face, the hurt in his voice. No, I couldn't do that. Not yet. When I finally moved, it felt like waking from a nightmare. My hands were trembling as I unlocked my car. As I pulled away, I looked back at the hotel one last time, half hoping they'd come out laughing, proving this was all some colossal misunderstanding. But the entrance stayed quiet. On the drive home, my mind replayed everything. I remembered all the times Kenneth had given me fatherly advice, all the holiday dinners when he sat at the head of the table, telling stories about honor and family. The betrayal stung, even though it wasn't aimed at me. By the time I reached our driveway, I felt hollow. Part of me wanted to forget I ever saw it. Part of me knew I couldn't. And deep down, I sensed that nothing in our family would ever feel quite the same again. I must have sat in the car for 10 minutes before I could convince myself to go inside. The house felt different, as if the air itself had thickened, pressing against my chest. Daniel wasn't home yet. He had a lunch meeting scheduled. I was grateful for the quiet, even though it left me alone with my thoughts. I set the dry cleaning on the hall table and went straight to the kitchen. My hands were still shaking when I poured a glass of water. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Kenneth and that woman disappearing into the hotel lobby. My brain kept trying to splice that image into my memories of him. Kenneth carving the Thanksgiving turkey. Kenneth helping us paint the nursery. Kenneth toasting our wedding. All of it clashed with what I'd witnessed. I pressed my palms to the cool countertop and tried to slow my breathing. You don't know the whole story, I told myself. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But in my gut, I knew better. The way they touched. The way they smiled. It wasn't some innocent meeting. I carried my phone to the sofa and sank into the cushions, scrolling mindlessly through social media to distract myself. But every few seconds, my thumb would hover over Daniel's contact photo. I almost called him. Almost. But the thought of dropping that bomb over the phone made me feel sick. What if I was wrong? What if I ruined everything because of a misunderstanding? The hours crept by. When I finally heard Daniel's car in the driveway, I felt my heart start to gallop. He came in carrying a bag of takeout, looking tired but content. He kissed me on the forehead and asked, "You okay? You look pale." I forced a smile and nodded. "Just a long day." He didn't press. He unpacked the food and started telling me about the client meeting, how it had gone better than expected, how he felt optimistic about the next quarter. I tried to listen. I really did. But every word he spoke felt like it was coming from underwater. My mind was stuck on a loop. Tell him. Don't tell him. Tell him. That evening, we were supposed to have dinner with his parents. I almost told Daniel I didn't feel well, that maybe we should stay home. But I didn't. Maybe I was afraid of seeming suspicious. Maybe I thought that seeing Kenneth again would help me figure out what to do. All I know is that by 6:30, we were pulling up to his parents' house. My stomach twisted into knots. Inside, everything looked exactly the same as it always did. Cozy, spotless, filled with little touches his mother loved. A vase of fresh lilies on the sideboard, candles flickering on the mantel. Kenneth was in the living room, reading the newspaper. He looked up and smiled when he saw us. "There they are," he said, rising to hug Daniel. He turned to me next, his arms outstretched, and for a second I couldn't move, but I made myself step forward. I let him embrace me. His cologne, woodsy, familiar, made bile rise in my throat. "Good to see you, sweetheart," he said warmly, as if nothing had happened. I pulled away, hoping he didn't notice the way my hands were trembling. My mother-in-law, Mary Ann, came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She kissed my cheek and ushered us to the table, chatting about the meal. No one noticed the way I kept glancing at Kenneth, searching his face for any sign of guilt. There was none. He laughed and told stories, exactly as he always had. Halfway through dinner, Daniel started describing a documentary we'd watched the week before. He couldn't remember the title, and I automatically supplied it, grateful for the distraction. But the moment I looked across the table again, Kenneth's eyes met mine, just for a second. And in that instant, I felt sure he knew I'd seen him. The realization sent a cold shiver through me. Did he recognize me in the hotel lobby? Did he suspect I'd say something? My mouth went dry. I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the tub, pressing my hands to my temples. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it would tear right through my chest. In that tiny bathroom, I tried to sort through the chaos in my head. If I told Daniel, he would be devastated. He'd always admired his father, looked up to him even. They'd built such a strong bond over the years. Telling him would destroy that. It would destroy Mary Ann too. But if I stayed silent, what did that say about me? Was I complicit? Was I just as much a liar for pretending nothing had happened? I thought about my own father, who left when I was 13, about the way my mother cried herself to sleep for months, about how I swore to myself that I would never, ever let secrets poison a family again. And yet here I was, holding a secret so corrosive it felt like it was already eating me from the inside out. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked haunted. I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer, but I also knew I couldn't blurt it out without thinking. I needed time. I needed to understand exactly what I'd seen and why it had happened before I shattered Daniel's world. When I returned to the dining room, Kenneth was telling a story about a golf trip. Marianne was laughing, and Daniel was listening intently. I slid back into my seat, trying to look normal, but I could feel Kenneth watching me, weighing me. In that moment, something settled into place. He knew, I knew, and he was daring me to say something. All through dessert, I barely tasted a thing. My mind was churning with questions. How long had this been going on? Who was the woman? Was it a fling or something deeper? Every answer I imagined felt worse than the last. When we finally left, I could hardly breathe. Daniel slipped his hand into mine as we walked to the car. "You sure you're okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, but the lie tasted like ashes in my mouth. I knew that nothing was okay. Not anymore. And somehow I was going to have to decide what to do with the truth. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kenneth's hand on the woman's back, his face so tender and familiar. My mind replayed that moment in the dining room, the way his eyes had locked onto mine like a silent challenge. I tried to imagine how Daniel would react if I told him. His father had always been a rock for him, steady, dependable, the first person he called when he needed advice, and I would be the one to crack that foundation. By dawn, I knew I couldn't just sit with this secret festering inside me. I needed answers. If nothing else, I had to confront Kenneth face to face. Maybe he would deny it. Maybe he would lie. But I couldn't stand another day pretending I didn't know. When Daniel left for work, he kissed my forehead and gave me a searching look. "You sure you're okay?" I nodded, even though I could feel the truth pressing against my ribcage like something alive. The moment the door closed behind him, I felt my resolve harden. I took a deep breath and called Kenneth. My thumb trembled over the call button. When his voice came through, smooth and warm as ever, I almost hung up. "Morning, Maya," he said. "Everything all right?" I swallowed hard. "Hi, I was wondering if we could meet. Just the two of us." There was a pause. I thought for a second he might pretend not to understand, but then he sighed softly. "Of course. Where?" "The cafe near the library," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, small and flat. "In an hour?" "I'll be there," he replied. He didn't ask why. He didn't pretend he didn't know. And somehow, that confirmation, the quiet acceptance, made my stomach twist. The drive to the cafe felt surreal, as if I were floating a few inches above the seat. I kept rehearsing what I would say, but the words tangled every time. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I spotted his car already there. He'd beaten me. He was waiting. Inside, he was sitting in a corner booth, his hands folded neatly on the table. He looked up when I walked in, his face composed. I thought I might see guilt, or at least embarrassment. But there was only a kind of weary resignation. "Thank you for coming," I managed as I slid into the booth opposite him. My throat felt raw. Kenneth inclined his head. "I thought you might call." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of conversation around us felt jarringly normal. Students tapping at laptops, a couple whispering over pastries. I looked at the swirl of cream dissolving in my coffee and tried to steady my breathing. "I saw you," I finally said. My voice came out in a hoarse whisper. At the Magnolia Hotel, yesterday morning. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. I know. That woman. He lifted a hand. Maya, please. Let's not pretend I can explain this away. You're too intelligent for that. I swallowed. So, you're admitting it? You're having an affair? Yes. The word landed on the table between us, heavier than I could have imagined. Her name is Vanessa. It's been about a year. A year. I pressed my palm flat against the tabletop, as if I could anchor myself to it. All that time, birthdays, holidays, dinners, he'd been living a double life. Does Marianne know? I asked, my voice shaking. His gaze dropped to his hands. No. At least, I don't think so. I've been careful. Careful, I repeated. My voice was bitter. Careful enough to bring her to a hotel across from my dry cleaner? He winced. For the first time, I saw something that looked like shame flicker across his face. I never meant for you to see, he said quietly. I laughed, short, harsh. That's what you're worried about? That you were caught? Maya, please. I know you think I'm a monster, and maybe I am. But before you decide what to do, please consider what this will do to Daniel. I felt something snap inside me. What this will do to Daniel. You did this, not me. He reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back before he could touch me. His shoulders sagged. I'm not asking you to approve, he said. I'm just asking you not to destroy him over something that you chose. I finished for him. My voice was low, but the fury in it surprised even me. He nodded slowly. Yes. Something I chose. For a moment, the silence between us was unbearable. I thought of Daniel as a boy, how he'd told me once that his father was his hero. I thought about Marianne, always so gracious, always so trusting. And I thought about the years ahead. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, tainted by this knowledge. I don't know what you expect me to do, I whispered. I'm asking you not to tell him, he said, voice gentle. Please, at least not yet. Let me figure this out. I wanted to scream at him, to stand up and shout that he was a coward. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I only knew that nothing would ever be the same. I can't promise that, I said finally. He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. I understand. I stood up. My legs felt weak. I looked down at him, at the man who had always been so steady and dependable. I barely recognized him now. As I turned to leave, he called after me softly. Maya, whatever you decide, I'm sorry. But as I walked out into the bright morning, blinking against the sun, I knew sorry wasn't enough. Not for this. Not for what he'd put in my hands. I drove home in a daze, the conversation replaying over and over in my mind. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the knowledge that now I was part of the lie. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, my heart pounding. I knew I had to decide soon, but every path felt like a disaster waiting to happen. And for the first time, I wondered if telling the truth was always the right thing to do, or if, sometimes, it was the thing that burned everything to the ground. The days that followed felt like living with a ticking bomb under my skin. Every morning, I'd wake up with a surge of determination. I would tell Daniel everything. By evening, I'd talked myself out of it, terrified that once the words left my mouth, there would be no going back. I started avoiding family gatherings, inventing excuses I hoped didn't sound too thin. I claimed I was behind on work, that I felt a little under the weather. Daniel seemed puzzled, but didn't push. He trusted me. That thought twisted the guilt tighter around my ribs. But on the third day, when I got home from the grocery store, he was waiting at the kitchen table, his laptop shut, his expression serious. I froze in the doorway, balancing a bag of oranges against my hip. "Maya," he said quietly, "what's going on with you?" I forced a smile. "What do you mean?" He tilted his head, studying me. "You've been off. Ever since dinner at my parents' house. You barely ate. You look like you haven't slept in days. Just talk to me." My heart lurched. This was it. This was the moment I should have told him everything. But the words felt enormous, impossible to push past my lips. I set the bag down and rubbed my temples. "I'm just tired," I whispered. It was the same lie I'd told myself every night. That's all. His eyes searched mine, and for a second I thought he might call me out. But he only nodded. Though I could see he didn't believe me. He stood and came to wrap his arms around me. My whole body went rigid. When he kissed my hair, I thought I might break down right there on the kitchen floor. "I'm here," he said softly. "Whatever it is." That night, I lay in bed long after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling. I knew I couldn't keep this secret forever, but I also knew I wasn't ready to be the one to destroy his illusions about the man he called Dad. The next morning, I drove to the Magnolia Hotel. I told myself I wasn't sure why, that maybe I was looking for evidence that it hadn't been real, that I'd imagined it. But as I parked across the street, my stomach clenched. I knew exactly what I was doing. I waited in the car for almost an hour before I saw Kenneth emerge. He wasn't alone. Vanessa was with him, wearing sunglasses and a white sundress. They stood close, talking in low voices before she kissed his cheek. He cupped her face in his hand, then turned to leave. I took a shaky breath. The sight of them together again made me feel sick. But it also settled something in me. This wasn't a fling he regretted. He'd chosen it, and he was still choosing it. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture before he disappeared around the corner. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I didn't know if I'd ever show the photo to Daniel, but it felt like a tiny shard of control in the chaos. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sit at the dinner table. I told Daniel I had a headache and went to bed early. I lay in the dark, scrolling through the picture over and over as if studying it might help me decide what to do. In the following days, I started to notice things I'd never seen before. The way Kenneth checked his phone constantly, the way he sometimes disappeared during family events, claiming calls from the golf club. Little details that felt so obvious now I was looking for them. And then, one afternoon, I found myself parked outside Marianne's house, the engine idling. I didn't even remember deciding to drive there. Some part of me was desperate to know. Did she already suspect? Was she living with this knowledge the way I was? I never rang the bell. I couldn't. Instead, I watched the curtains flutter in the living room window, picturing her inside, blissfully unaware. Or worse, fully aware, but pretending. The thought made my chest ache. That evening, Daniel came home with a bottle of my favorite wine. He set it on the counter, studying me. "I thought maybe we could have a nice dinner. You seem like you could use a break." I tried to smile, but the tears rose before I could stop them. He stepped closer, alarmed. "Maya, please, tell me what's wrong." My voice broke. "I can't." His face crumpled. "Can't or won't?" I pressed a hand over my mouth, shaking my head. I couldn't answer. He turned away, his jaw working. I could see how much it hurt him that I wouldn't share what was eating me alive. That night, we slept on opposite sides of the bed, an ocean of silence between us. I lay awake, wondering if my fear of hurting him had already started to do exactly that. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't keep running in circles. If I didn't decide soon, the choice would be made for me, by circumstance, by a slip of the tongue, by the slow erosion of trust between us. I took out my phone and scrolled to Kenneth's contact. My thumb hovered over it, but I didn't press call. Not yet. Instead, I pulled up the photo I'd taken, studying every pixel. Proof, if I needed it. A line I could no longer pretend hadn't been crossed. I thought about all the lies that would keep piling up if I stayed silent, about the hollow look in Daniel's eyes when I refused to talk, about the way my own reflection had started to look like a stranger. By the time the sun came up fully, I knew, whatever happened, I had to stop pretending. I couldn't be part of the lie any longer. But whether I would confront Marianne first or tell Daniel everything, I still wasn't sure. I only knew that every hour I stayed silent was another hour I betrayed my own sense of what was right. And in the quiet of the kitchen, the weight of that truth finally settled on my shoulders, heavier than anything I'd ever carried. By the next morning, I couldn't pretend anymore. The strain of holding it in was tearing me apart. And I knew if I waited any longer, Daniel would either demand the truth or start imagining things even worse than reality. But I also couldn't bear the thought of blindsiding him without knowing, with certainty, what Marianne did or didn't know. Some instinct told me that she was part of the puzzle I didn't fully understand. Maybe it was the way she looked so composed at dinner while I was unraveling. Maybe it was the stories I'd heard over the years, how Kenneth had been busy with work more times than anyone could count. Maybe, deep down, she already knew. That afternoon, I called her. My voice wavered, but I kept it steady enough to suggest we have coffee, just the two of us. She didn't sound suspicious, only surprised. She offered to host me at her house, but I declined. I needed neutral ground, someplace I could ask questions without the weight of family photographs staring down from the walls. We met at a small cafe tucked behind the town library. Marianne arrived early, as she always did, and was already seated with a cup of tea when I walked in. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes searched my face, as if she sensed this wasn't an ordinary visit. "Everything okay, dear?" she asked as I slid into the seat across from her. I opened my mouth, and for a moment, nothing came out. My heart thumped so hard I was sure she could hear it. Finally, I drew a shaky breath. "I need to ask you something, and I'm sorry if it seems strange, but I have to know." Her brow furrowed. "All right." I hesitated. This felt like stepping off a cliff. "Have you ever suspected Kenneth of being unfaithful?" The words hung between us, enormous. Her expression didn't change. She didn't gasp or clutch her chest. Instead, she set her teacup down carefully, aligning it with the saucer. A long, quiet moment passed. Then she sighed, long and low, as if she'd been holding the breath for years. I wondered when this would come to light. My throat went dry. "You knew." "I've suspected," she said softly, not quite meeting my eyes, "for a very long time." I blinked. "But you never said anything." She looked past me, toward the window where the late afternoon sun was streaming through the glass. "When you've built a life with someone for nearly 4 decades, you learn how to look away, how to decide what you can live with." She paused. "Sometimes it feels easier to keep the peace than to tear it all apart." I felt like the floor had fallen away. "How could you stand it?" Marianne's eyes finally found mine, and for the first time I saw the sorrow etched deep into her face. "Because I loved him. Because I told myself it was only affairs, not love. Because I wanted our children to have a family that looked whole." She swallowed. Maybe that was foolish. Maybe it was selfish. But it was what I thought I had to do. Tears burned behind my eyes. I thought of all the holidays we'd spent together, all the warm smiles and toasts, all of it balanced on a lie that everyone, it seemed, had agreed to keep hidden. "Why are you asking me this now?" she asked gently. I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to protect Daniel from the ugly truth, but I also knew he deserved better than a lifetime of illusions. I took a breath. Because I saw them, I whispered. At the Magnolia Hotel. He was with a woman. She didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes for a moment, as if confirming something she'd always known. I'm so sorry you had to see that. I shook my head. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm betraying everyone, no matter what choice I make. Marianne reached across the table and took my hand in hers. Her skin was warm, the gesture unexpectedly comforting. There's no easy way through this. Whatever you decide, someone will be hurt. But Daniel, he deserves to know. Yes, she said quietly. He does. And so do you. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. If you've known all these years, why didn't you ever leave? Her expression softened. Because leaving would have meant admitting, to everyone and to myself, that I'd built my life on something broken. I wasn't brave enough to do that. You are. She squeezed my hand. Don't let my choices dictate yours. We sat there a while longer, neither of us saying much. When I finally stood to leave, she looked up at me with a sadness so profound, it felt like it belonged to every woman who'd ever been betrayed, but stayed anyway. Whatever you do, she said, her voice low, do it with an open heart. Don't let this turn you into someone you're not. As I walked to my car, I felt like I was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as Daniel's mother, not as the perfect hostess, but as a woman who had made peace with her own compromises and was now telling me I didn't have to do the same. I drove home in silence, the late sun casting long shadows over the dashboard. In my bag, my phone buzzed with a text from Kenneth. Please don't do this. It will destroy everything. I turned the screen over without replying. When I stepped inside, Daniel was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He glanced up, smiling faintly, but the worry in his eyes hadn't faded. For a moment, I just watched him. The man I loved. The man whose life was about to splinter in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And in that instant, I knew the choice was already made. I could not be the keeper of his father's secrets any longer. The only question left was how to tell him, and whether, when the words finally came out, our marriage would survive the truth. That night felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Every time I tried to swallow, my throat closed up. I could hear Daniel moving around the kitchen, opening drawers, rinsing the cutting board, humming under his breath as if everything was normal, as if the world wasn't about to split open. I sat at the table, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the wood grain. My heart was beating so fast it made me dizzy. For a moment, I considered staying silent. Just one more night of pretending. Just one more dinner where we could laugh about something trivial and pretend the world wasn't about to end. But Marianne's words came back to me. Don't let this turn you into someone you're not. I didn't want to be the woman who kept secrets. I didn't want to live the rest of my life with this sickness in my chest. So when Daniel set a plate in front of me and sat down across the table, I looked up and met his eyes. My voice trembled, but it was steady enough to carry the words that had been burning a hole in me. There's something I need to tell you. He froze. His expression shifted. Confusion first, then apprehension. What is it? My throat went dry. I forced myself to keep going. I saw your father last week. He was with a woman. They went into the Magnolia Hotel together. The silence that fell over the table was so complete, it felt like a physical thing pressing on my chest. Daniel didn't blink, didn't speak. For a long moment, he just stared at me as if he couldn't quite process the sentence. Finally, he swallowed. You're sure? Yes. My voice cracked. I confronted him. He admitted it. He leaned back slowly, pressing a hand over his mouth. His eyes were wide, glassy with disbelief. How long? He said about a year. He shut his eyes. I could see the way his jaw flexed, the way his knuckles whitened where he gripped the edge of the table. For a second I thought he might scream or flip the plate onto the floor, but he didn't. He just sat there, breathing hard, as if each breath hurt. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" he whispered finally. I felt the first tears spill down my cheeks. "Because I didn't know how. Because I was afraid it would break you." A shudder went through him. "It did." "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to me. For several minutes, he didn't move. Just when I started to wonder if I should leave him alone, he spoke, his voice low and ragged. He was always the one I looked up to, the one who never let me down. I stood slowly, crossing the room until I was close enough to feel the heat of his body. "I know." He turned then, and the look on his face undid me. It wasn't just hurt. It was betrayal layered on top of betrayal, the realization that his father had lied, and that I had held that lie inside me for days. "Did my mom know?" he asked hoarsely. "She suspected," I said, "but she chose not to confront it." He covered his face with his hands. I wanted to reach for him, but something told me he needed space more than he needed comfort. I watched as he sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, breathing like he'd just run miles. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I don't know how to look at him again." "I'm here," I said quietly. "Whatever you need." When he looked up at me, there was so much pain in his eyes it took my breath away. But there was also something else, something almost like relief. Because now he didn't have to wonder. Now the truth was out, ugly as it was. That night we didn't talk much more. He texted his father only once. "I know, we'll talk when I'm ready." Then he turned his phone off and set it face down on the table. We lay in bed side by side, staring at the ceiling. At some point, our hands found each other between the sheets. The gesture wasn't enough to erase what had happened, but it was enough to remind us that even when everything else felt broken, we were still here. Together. In the days that followed, the fallout spread through the family like ripples in a pond. Marianne called me to thank me for telling the truth, though her voice sounded tired and hollow. Kenneth tried to call Daniel, but he didn't answer. I knew he needed time to decide whether forgiveness was even possible. One evening, after dinner, Daniel finally broke the silence between us. "I'm glad you told me," he said quietly, "even if it hurt." I looked at him, searching his face for any trace of resentment. "I was afraid you'd hate me for it." He shook his head. "I don't. You did what you thought was right. And I think you were right." He reached for my hand across the table. His touch was warm, steady. In that moment, I knew we would find a way through the wreckage. Maybe not quickly, maybe not easily, but together. If there was one thing this ordeal had taught me, it was that truth is never as clean or as simple as you want it to be. It doesn't come with guarantees. It doesn't spare you from pain, but it does set you free from the corrosive weight of secrets. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't discovering someone else's betrayal, it's deciding what you're willing to become in the face of it. I didn't want to be complicit. I didn't want to be silent. I didn't want to trade my integrity for an illusion of peace. And in the end, telling the truth didn't destroy everything. It just forced us to look at our lives without the comforting blur of denial, to see clearly, to choose each other again, in the raw light of reality. And that, I realized, was a kind of love too, the kind that survives the breaking